This is Maximus.
Greetings, everybody. Maximus here. Well, in what is a purely symbolic exercise, which sadly will result with nothing for the families, after 11 long years, the UN Aviation Council has finally gotten around to ruling that Russia was responsible for the downing of Malaysian Air Flight MH17 over Ukraine in 2014 that killed all 298 passengers and crew. Personally, I didn't know there was still any doubt, but now the UN believes it, so there you go. And now the victims of the families are calling for reparations to be paid from Russia for the families of the victims. However, we know that's never going to happen either. Flight MH17 was traveling from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur when it was shot down by a Russian surface-to-air missile while flying over eastern Ukraine in 2014 as fighting raged between pro-Russian separatists and Ukrainian forces. Among the victims were 196 Dutch citizens and 38 Australian citizens or residents. The governments of Australia and the Netherlands said the Council of the International Civil Aviation Organization, or the ICAO, would consider what form of reparations was appropriate in the coming weeks. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong said her government welcomed the decision and urges the ICAO to move swiftly to determine remedies. Foreign Minister Wong said in a statement that we call upon Russia to finally face up to its responsibility for this horrific act of violence and make reparations for its egregious conduct as required under law. And the Dutch foreign minister said that the Netherlands and Australia want the ICAO Council to order Russia to enter into negotiations over reparations. Caspar Veldkamp, the Dutch Minister of Foreign Affairs, said that the UN's decision is an important step towards establishing the truth and achieving justice and accountability for all victims of Flight MH17, their families, and loved ones. I don't know what truth they're looking for. We all know Russia shot that plane down. The decision also sends a clear message to the international community. States cannot violate international law with impunity. Okay. The IACA, the International Civil Aviation Organization, said in a statement Monday evening, the Russian Federation failed to uphold its obligations under international air law in 2014, downing Malaysian Airlines Flight MH17. The ICAO said this was the first time in its history that its council has made a determination on the merits of a dispute between member states. The agency, which is based in Montreal, sets global aviation standards adopted by its 193 member nations, but lacks regulatory power. Australia and the Netherlands have been seeking compensation and an apology. However, Russia, which has denied involvement despite the findings of an international investigation, unilaterally withdrew from negotiations with the two countries in October of 2020. The case with the ICAO was launched in 2022 by Australia and the Netherlands. In November 2022, Dutch judges convicted two Russian men and a Ukrainian man in absentia of murder for their role in the attack. Moscow called the ruling scandalous and said it would not extradite its citizens. In 2023, a team of international investigators from the Netherlands, Australia, Malaysia, Belgium, and the Ukraine said there were strong indications that the Russian President Vladimir Putin had personally signed off on a decision to supply the missile that downed Flight MH17. But the Netherlands and Australia want the ICAO Council to order Russia to enter into negotiations over reparations. However, and I'm sure you know this already, the ICAO lacks regulatory power but holds moral suasion and sets global aviation standards overwhelmingly adopted by its 193 member states. But in 2023, 3 men involved in the downing of Malaysian Airlines Flight MH17 were sanctioned by the Australian government. The sanctions target Russian Sergei Dubinsky and the Ukrainian national Leonid Karachenko, who are both found guilty in court and sentenced to life in jail. Except these men are still in Russia and will never see a day in jail. But like I said, an exercise in futility. However, if it brings the families peace, I am all for it and I wish them well. And Australia has also sanctioned Russian national Sergei Mushakov, a colonel with the Russian Armed Forces. In July 2014, Mushakov was the commander of the 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade, which supplied the bulk Teller missile system that downed MH17. Another convicted perpetrator, Igor Gherkin, was sanctioned by Australia in 2014 for supporting separatist activity in eastern Ukraine. As for Moscow, as I said, they called the ruling scandalous and said it will not extradite their citizens because, of course, they won't. So like I said, I admire the public display of justice by the United Nations attempt here. However, and hey, I'm not telling you something you don't already know. Russia is never going to pay for this, nor will they pay for the Azerbaijan plane they shot down last December. But like I said, if it brings the family some closure, I'm all for it, no matter how futile the exercise. So that's all I have for now, just an update on a historically sad aviation crash. But as always, I'm looking forward to your thoughts, and be sure to let me know down below. And until next time, as always, this is Maximus.